Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Landing America podcast. I'm your host, TATIANA, and today I have a very special guest, immigration attorney Daven Ghandi from Malaysia, who, as many of us, is also the U.S. immigrant for the past 18 years and as such has a lot to say about this topic. So welcome, Daven.
Thank you, Tatiana. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here, especially currently with the climate surrounding immigrants and immigration and how immigrants are so negatively viewed, or so it seems in the current political climate. I think your podcast is so important. So thank you for having your podcast and thank you for inviting me to speak on your podcast.
The first thing that I'm interested in is how was life in Malaysia? How was growing up in Malaysia?
Okay, so growing up in Malaysia, I want to say that I led um a pretty good life in the sense that I was able to get education, and then my parents were also able to send me abroad to get my education. Malaysia is a multicultural country, so there's the Malays, the Chinese, the Indians, and a few other ethnicities as well. There's this slogan that's pretty popular in the 90s, and a lot of my friends in Eastern Europe and all have heard this, which is Malaysia truly Asia. I don't know if you've ever heard it before. It's Malaysia truly Asia. It's like a very popular, catchy song, and it's in all their ads. So it truly is the embodiment of Asia because of all the different ethnicities that you can find all over Asia. And growing up in Malaysia was interesting in the sense that I got exposed to many different languages. So I grew up speaking about three languages, well, four, and then when I came to America, I then picked up Spanish. So those were like a lot of the privileges I got to experience in Malaysia. It has its negative sides as well, but overall, I really enjoyed my upbringing in Malaysia for 18 years, and then the next 18 years of my life has been in the United States, which I have grown to become the person that I am. So I'm always reminded of my experience in Malaysia, but now I feel like I've merged both my Malaysian experience and my American experience to find my space in the world.
And when did you first start thinking about living in the U.S.?
I never really thought about living in the US. So my parents growing up, they spoke to us in English, my brothers and I, because they are like, you know what, we want you to go abroad to be able to get an education. And then possibly come back to Malaysia and run my family business. But so I never really thought about it. However, the way I came to the US was there was an education conference in Malaysia where representatives from all over the United States came and they were speaking to college students about coming to the US to study. And the lady from Wisconsin was just so sweet and so nice that I was like, okay, yeah. So she looked at my grades, she said, okay, you're accepted. And then 2 months later, I was on a flight to Wisconsin once I got the visa and everything as an international student.
So she was this prototype of American with this nice attitude that got you hooked.
Yes.
All right. So when was that? When was the first time you got here?
So this was in August 2007.
And you started studying here?
Yes. So I studied at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, which is a small town in Wisconsin called Eau Claire, with a population of about 70,000 people. So it was a huge shock for me going from living in a city of a few million to then coming to a town of 70,000.
Wow. So usually it's the opposite for people coming here. They are used to living in small towns and then they got to New York and they're like, whoa, what is this? You had the
Yeah.
opposite experience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if I moved to New York, I will probably be shocked, but it was because I moved to a smaller town that it felt nice. I was glad that I started in a small town rather than starting in New York. And by the way, I live in New York now, so that transition from small town to then a big city like New York was nice.
And you started studying immigration law right away.
No, so studying law in the United States requires you to first have a prior degree, so a bachelor's degree. So when I came to the United States, I studied political science, just because I wanted to understand more of the U.S. politics and how the legal system works. And then I went to law school. In law school, you don't really pick a specialization, but what happened was during law school, I did take an immigration law clinic where we got to work on actual cases and represent clients in court. And that really sparked a interest for me to pursue immigration. And then, since I graduated, I have been practicing. Well, I started with criminal and immigration, and then I just did immigration.
So what happened when your student visa were finished? What was your next step?
Yeah, so this was in 2010 was when I finished my first degree. And then I usually once you're done with a study here in the United States, so whether it's a bachelor's or a master's, you get 1 year of work authorization, and this is called the OPT. So during my first OPT, I did an internship at a human rights clinic, a nonprofit, and then also at the University of Minnesota Human Rights Center. And then after that 1 year was done, I went back to school. Well, I went to law school. So then I had 3 more years of student visa. And then once I graduated from law school, I got another year of OPT. During that year was when I moved to New York. Well, I sat for the bar, passed the bar, thankfully, and then clerked for a judge in New York, and then clerked for a law firm that does immigration law for that 1 year. But then the problem arose that my employer could not sponsor my visa because when you want to sponsor an immigrant, you need to show an ability to pay. And so, because I'm in New York City, the pay for attorneys are usually higher, and I don't get to decide that. The Department of Labor decides that. So, my employer couldn't pay me lower, and so he couldn't afford to sponsor me, and I had to leave the country.
Where did you go?
So, I went to Guatemala. I even deciding where I wanted to go was really interesting. I spoke to mentors to kind of figure out what my next steps were gonna be. And then one mentor in particular told me, "Hey, David, you are from Asia. You could go back to Asia and build a specialization that way, or you could just go to where your clients are from. A majority of your clients are from." So you can learn the language, you can learn the socio-economic political background. And I just thought that was so cool. Like so cool of an advice. And it also makes it feel like I'm on an adventure, right? And I chose Guatemala because a lot of my clients they do come from the northern triangle. It's Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And so a lot of them are people who are fleeing persecution or who fear for their lives. I didn't want to be an attorney who pretended to know what was going on in the world. I really wanted to go and see what life really was like in Guatemala. And so my plan was to be there for I guess maybe a year or 9 months, just to kind of go start in Guatemala and go through the entire region. But after 3 months, I came back to the United States, and I was able to then show that I can speak Spanish and I understand the clients, and so I got a job offer and I got sponsored for the H-1B, which is the work visa.
What was the life there? Did you experience firsthand what you're talking about?
Yes, yes and no. Obviously, I also am very mindful about where I went, so I didn't go right in the middle where people were getting kidnapped or those kinds of things. So I lived in the more safer area where there is tourists, and so usually it's more well protected. What I would do is I would take local excursions or trips with with the school or with nonprofits just to see the work that these nonprofit organizations do, and then I was able to see really the life of the people there, and so even the poverty that was ongoing in a lot of these places. Another experience I had was I got to visit the slums where a lot of these children's live, and a lot of these parents work around there, and there's nonprofits that build schools right in between these slums, and these are the most dangerous areas usually. So there was a school in the middle of the slums, and I got to visit the school and did like a day of service with the children and the students, and it was really nice because I think what I also learned throughout my trip there is even when you don't have a lot, you can still find joy in your days. And so that was nice. That was nice. Really taught me to appreciate life.
So then you got back to the US, you started working, and you mentioned to me that you got your green card through the employer after.
Yes.
How was the process of that?
Yeah, I mean the process is just so frustrating and complex and nuanced and a lot of anxiety throughout the entire process. I've learned to let life happen and try and react to it. Sometimes you just have no control and you just have to find a way to make things work. So when I had to leave the country because my visa ran out, I was like, okay, let me make the best of it, right? And so when I came back, I got the H-1B sponsorship, and that's only for 6 years usually. uh the thing what employers usually do is they keep immigrants on the H-1B for at least 4 or 5 years before they start the green card process. And the reason for this is if you're on an H-1B, you are only allowed to work for that employer. So in a way, the employer's like, well, you're gonna work for me, so I'm gonna let you work for me first to see if it's even worth filing the green card for you. But I had a great boss and a great employer, and he was willing to start the green card process immediately. So um, in 2020, well, 2019, I think we started it. And then obviously, as we all know, something happened in 2020, which was COVID, and that delayed my application for, well, 3, 4 years because I've only got my green card in 2023 January.
Wow.
So yeah. So, I always say whenever my clients are complaining, like, why is this taking so long? And I'm just like, I know, why is this taking so long? And if I'm gonna compare my entire time in the US from when I first came, it took me 17 years to get my green card finally, which is just crazy if you think about it. Yeah,
It's unbelievable.
yeah. So I got my green card early last year, January 2023.
Okay, so and now you're working basically with what type of clients?
Yeah. So after getting my green card and after working for my employer for a while, I decided to start my own firm. So Casa Law is my immigration law firm, and we work on all kinds of visas, so family-based, employment-based, and humanitarian visas. A lot of my focus is on at least trying to build my employment-based visa practice. So I do a lot of investor visa. I also represent athletes who want to come to the US. So anybody with extraordinary ability who wants to come to the US, I represent them. And then I do the family-based visas as well. As to the humanitarian visa aspect, I work with children who have been abandoned, abused, or neglected, LGBTQ individuals, and then also women who have suffered some kind of abuse. In the past, I used to do a lot of these humanitarian-based visas, so I have a lot of court experience or trial experience. But I find that sometimes it can be very overwhelming and depressing. I like to balance that out with the marriage visas because those are like, hey, welcome to America, you're in love, let's do this. So that's kind of how I like balance all my cases. But generally, I do all immigration cases right now.
Got it. So you have a basically YouTube channel and Instagram account and Facebook account, and I noticed that things you're talking about there, besides other things, is common misconceptions and misinformation that your clients come to you with.
Mhm.
Could you give us some examples of those, which are the most common?
Sure. I mean, before I start about the misconceptions that my clients have, I would like to talk about the big misconception that a lot of other people have about immigrants, which is that we don't eat dogs and cats. Immigrants are resilient, we are courageous, we are capable, we build families, we build businesses, we contribute so much to America. And it takes so much courage to leave everything behind, the people you love, the life that you grew up with, to come to a new country and to then have the potential president of the United States reduce us to saying that we eat animals. It's just, I mean, not animals, but we eat cats and dogs. It's just so derogatory and minimizes all our experience. So I wanted to start with that misconception first. And let's talk about what clients usually say. I think number one would be I'll just get married to fix my status. I think that one is because everyone thinks that marriage is the solution, but there's a few issues with that. Number one, it has to be a real marriage because if it's a fake marriage, and if U.S. immigration finds out, the immigrant and the U.S. citizen partner can both face severe consequences, including being imprisoned up to 5 years or fined up to 250,000, and for the immigrant being deported and then being permanently barred from coming to the U.S. So I always well, I caution everybody to not engage in any immigration fraud. And it's horrible when I have a client sit in front of me and because they think I am their lawyer or they have the money to pay me, they think that I'm going to commit fraud for them. And the thing is, I can lose my license, and because I'm an immigrant, I can get deported myself. So, I mean, it's very important that we have to understand the nuances. If it's a legitimate marriage, great. I am all for it. Do it. And then also, and I think this goes to my second misconception, which is that clients think that it's all just paperwork. Uh, and for this, I want to be very careful here. Some immigration forms, I think it is possible for somebody to do it on their own if they have the time and the resources to sit down and read all the instructions carefully. I had a friend um, who did the process herself with her spouse, and she told me, "Hey, Daven, it took me 18 hours to put everything together, or like to read the instructions and fill out the forms. When you hire an attorney, it would take me less than maybe 2 hours to put everything together." So that's the difference. And then every mistake that is made on the form could lead to very negative consequences. So you get your application denied, which is huge because then you're either left with the option of leaving the country or refiling, and it's just a lot of headache because your case becomes a lot more complicated once there's a denial on the record. So some cases, I think if it's a straightforward case, and when I say straightforward, I meant like if you are here on a valid visa and you get married to a U.S. citizen and you you tick all of the checklists and the requirements, I think it's feasible for somebody to do it on their own. But when there are things that complicate the process, like unlawful entry, or if there is a criminal record at play, these are the instances where you need legal help or a legal expert who can review your documents and see whether you actually qualify or not. So I think that's the second misconception. The third one, which I always laugh about, is yeah, my friend's cousin's lawyer got the case approved in 6 weeks. It doesn't happen. And honestly, every time it happens to me, like if US immigration approves one of my clients' cases in like 2 months, I'm so excited because I know that client's gonna go tell everyone, oh, my lawyer got my case approved in 2 months. But honestly, this is something out of our control. Attorneys cannot determine how quickly immigration processes the case. The only thing we can do is if immigration takes a very long time to process the case, then we can either reach out to US immigration, we can reach out to your congressperson, or we can even file a lawsuit to try and get US immigration to process the case. But the idea that one specific attorney is able to get the cases expedited, it's not true at all. It usually is dependent on US immigration or USCIS. And so it varies because even if the average is 6 months or a year, sometimes it could take a lot more, sometimes it could take a lot less. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, I think the next one, maybe I can talk to one misconception, and I think it's related to paperwork, which is hiring notaries or hiring help which is not a US immigration lawyer. Um, in a lot of countries, notaries are people who are either lawyers with more certifications or they're just highly regarded in the community. In the United States, notaries are usually somebody who only witnesses signatures of documents. So if you drive by a notary office, usually you'll see them advertise like, oh, we are also immigration form preparers, which is nice because they charge maybe very little. But that's the thing, they are not experts in immigration law. I would say rather than going to a notary, do it yourself. But the problem with notary is a lot of my clients that come back to me is because a notary has messed their case up. And so then I'm like, well, you're coming to me and I have to fix the mistake and then also review the documents that has been done and think about what your solutions are. So it's going to cost the client a lot more than to come to an attorney. So I would always caution against going to a notary because they are not lawyers and they are just immigration form preparers, which, I mean, take it as it is. It could be a good thing if it's a straightforward case, or it could be a disaster if it's not.
Mhm. Yeah, many of these questions I also encounter when I talk to some of the listeners or just friends. But one of the questions that I have and that I encounter a lot is the E2 visa.
Hmm.
I had a lot of people asking me about that because also the misconception they have is that, oh, if I want to be an investor in the US, I have to invest $1 million to be able to get my green card and live there. So, what's the truth?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because when you look at immigration laws in the US, there's the immigrant visas and then there's the non-immigrant visas. The immigrant visas are basically the green cards, the visas that will give you the green card. There is an immigrant visa for an investor and there is a non-immigrant visa for the investor. So the immigrant visa, which is the green card, and is the EB-5 visa, that is for investments up to $1 million or more. And then it's true. That is the idea that you invest in the United States, in the economy, you build jobs, and then you could potentially get your green card. Now, there is another visa that's not really talked about or not very known. Uh, and I also understand why it's not very known. It's called the E2 treaty visa. Now, for the E2 treaty visa, the most important thing to remember is that first, you have to be from a country that already has a treaty with the United States. So not a lot of countries have treaties. Certain countries do. And so that's the number one requirement, that you have to be a national of that country. And so that's why I think it's not really known. The E2 visa, what it does is it allows anyone who is a national of a treaty country to come to the United States to either start or run a business. And this would allow them to continuously be in the United States, so they can renew their E2 visa indefinitely. And then they also have to show that they are able to make a substantial investment. Now, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to ask you, just based on what I told you, do you have any follow-up questions?
Yes, I would like to know what's the minimum investment. And maybe let's do an example. I am from Slovakia
Mhm.
and I would like to open the gym in the US.
Yeah,
What are the steps? How much money do I need? Who should I contact?
yeah. 1 second, I'm just looking up real quick if Slovak Republic is
In
part of
the
the.
treaty.
Yeah, so Republic since January 1, 1993 has been part of the E2 visa treaty uh, with the United States. So that's good. Now, let's take your example. Slovak national who wants to open a gym in the United States. First of all, that's a very good business because E2 visas usually work best in the context of smaller mom and pop businesses. So a laundromat, a coffee shop, a gym, they are all great business options. Um, Now let's talk about the minimum investment. So there really it's hard because there really isn't an actual minimum that you need to invest because it really depends on what it takes to make that particular business successful. So if what it takes to set up a gym, including buying the equipment, getting the space, hiring trainers, all of that is 50,000, then 50,000 is what you have to show. But if it's generally, if you are closer to the 100K, 100,000, that's generally, again, depending on the business, a good amount to aim for.
So let's say if you open a food truck, maybe you need only, I don't know, 20,000. That's still good to start with.
Potentially, yes. And then
Hmm.
there are other requirements with the E2 visa. So number one, show that they are part of the treaty country. Number two, show that they are making an investment and the investment has to be substantial. So like we just spoke about, it cannot be if it takes 100,000, they cannot make a $5,000 investment and say, I'm good, like I can build everything once I'm there. So that's important. And then ownership with the E2 visa, you can also bring in partners, but you have to remember that the investor must own at least 50% of the business to qualify for the E2 visa. Um, and then it's also important that, and this goes back to the type of business, that it's not a passive business. So, buying a house, for example, even though you are investing money, that's viewed as a passive business, so it doesn't qualify. Owning a gym is an active business, so that would potentially qualify. Um, Another requirement, it's not technically a requirement, but it goes to showing how successful the business could be, is showing that you can create US jobs. So showing that you can create jobs and benefit the economy in the United States. That helps as well. With the E2 visa, interestingly, even though you can renew it indefinitely, you still have to show that you have an intent to depart the United States at the end of the E2 visa. So when you go to the consulate to interview, you cannot say like, "Oh, I just want to come to the United States and live there forever," because then you'll get the visa denied. Um, and then finally, I think the last requirement to keep in mind is that the funds have to be from lawful sources. So it cannot be, from gambling or whatever. It could be even a gift. It could be savings. It could be an investment. All of those work. But they have to be lawful source and you have to show where the funds are coming from. Now, let's talk about what options there are for people who are already in the United States on an E2 visa and say they want to get the green card. Sometimes the E2 visa is like a stepping stone towards applying for the EB5 green card, which is the $1 million or more investment. So people may want to come in on the E2 visa and then build the business to a point where they could qualify for the EB5, or they could potentially look at other immigrant visa options. So if they are able to grow their business to a point where they can show that there is a separation, employer-employee relationship, so they could, for example, build a board of directors within the company and then have the company sponsor them for their employment-based green card. That's also an option. So there are options. It's not a very straightforward path because the most straightforward path is showing that you can build a business to $1 million or more. But there are other ways that people can explore potential options of staying here indefinitely.
Is talking to a lawyer the first step they need to take if they would like to take this route?
Yeah, I would say the first step would be just Googling, is my country a part of the E2 visa treaty? Usually you will pull up a USCIS website that has the list of countries. So look at that and see if you're even part of the list. And then think about whether you have the funds, whether you have the means of investing. Once you have all of that, I would say, yeah, reach out to an immigration attorney, and then we can review the criteria together to put together a plan or talk about what the next steps are. Sometimes with these applications, you also want to include a business plan, and so attorneys often work with business plan writers, consulting companies who can craft that business plan for an investor. Other times, if the investor is somebody with financial knowledge who is an economist or works in that field, they can also write their own business plans. But yeah, I would say definitely consult with an attorney just to see whether the business you are thinking about is viable and whether it is a good option. Because sometimes you may just qualify for another visa that you don't need to spend money on, which is great.
How can you find a good immigration attorney if you've never been to the US? You cannot meet them in person. There is so many of them online. How to pick?
Yeah. So I always say, let me put myself in the place of an immigrant first. Um, what would I want to look for? Um, I think first I want to be able to find somebody who I can connect with, who who may or may not understand my situation, because if somebody can empathize, I think that they will fight a lot more for my cause and my visa and my case, rather than somebody who doesn't have personal experience with it. And I tell you this just also from the standpoint of when I was interviewing for jobs with immigration lawyers, trying to get my visa sponsorship. One of the attorney told me, "How can you be so careless with your future? How can you be so careless with your visa situation?" And I was like shocked because first of all, I applied to over 100 jobs when I moved to New York, and they as an immigration attorney, the attorney is supposed to understand how difficult this process is. It's not like, hey, I found an employer, great, you can get your visa. It doesn't work that way. So for an attorney to say that to me makes me think that he's not going to be a good attorney for his clients. So I think number one, just making sure that you've spoken to the attorney or you've seen videos of this attorney and you're like, this sounds like a good person and I would like to speak to him at least initially, right? To set up that first meeting. Second, always check whether the attorney is actually licensed and barred in the state that they are practicing in. Immigration is a federal law, so any attorney from any state, as long as they have a license, can practice immigration law, but they still need to have that license first. So you can easily check this up on the New York State website. I mean, on the attorney bar's website, where there is you just search their name. Is this attorney a licensed attorney? And you can find them. Specifically with immigration, there is a immigration lawyers association called AILA. AILA is one of the organizations that really keep attorneys up to date with all the changing laws. And they are huge proponents for immigrants. So I would always say, see if the attorney is affiliated with AILA, because if they are, chances are these are attorneys who really care about development in the law. So those are the three things I would say is essential. No, speaking to the attorney, checking the attorney's credential, and then seeing whether they are part of organizations that support immigrant work.
Amazing. Now let's switch subject a little bit. I always ask my guests to compare a little bit their home country with the U.S. And since you lived in the U.S. already a substantial time of your life, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure you can compare it pretty well. What would you say is the biggest difference?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is, and this is something I've noticed from the very beginning of moving to the United States, that people are so outspoken here, that sometimes they are speaking, but nothing really substantial comes out of their mouth. Um, when I first moved here, I was like, wow, I like that confidence. Um, but sometimes I'm like, but that's blind confidence. However, like in Asia or in Malaysia at least, people don't speak out as much, I think. But when they speak, it's with more substance. Now, the issue is in a lot of business settings or professional settings or whatever, the best person doesn't always get the promotion, doesn't always get the job. Sometimes you have to be the loud one, you have to be confident, you have to be the one that speaks up. So that difference is something that I've learned and incorporated into my life. And so even if I'm the only minority in any room, I go in like I belong there, right? Because I'm like, whatever, like it doesn't matter that everyone here is white. I'm just gonna walk in like I belong to this space. And that confidence has helped me throughout my journey. Other differences I've noticed is, um, so it's hard because I want to say when I first moved to Wisconsin, it was 97% white, like Caucasian. And I was one of maybe like 10 brown kids in the entire town. So everybody like knew me. Um, and then I moved to San Diego, California, where again, I didn't see a lot of Malaysians or other Indian people. Then I moved to New York, and New York is so diverse that now I'm like, okay, like it feels like I am in a big city. Very, there's lots of food. Um, but if I'm comparing food in America and Malaysia, I have to say, maybe it's because I grew up with Malaysian food, but Malaysian food takes the cake for me, and I go back every year just to eat Malaysian food.
Same here. I go home to for two things I always say, and it's family and food.
Yeah,
I miss
100%.
I miss Slovak food as well.
Yeah.
Is there anything you don't like about the US?
I think just because we're in election season, it feels like the country is so polarized sometimes. If you are either a Republican or a Democrat, we need to bridge the differences and find more similarities. So around election season, it usually gets so tense. And then us immigrants in the middle are like, whoa, what's going on here? Because I feel like both sides are like trying to paint immigrants not in the best of light. Um, so I think my one issue right now with America is that it needs to be more welcoming of immigrants, and it needs to celebrate immigrant contributions a lot more. Because
Okay.
in the news, I'm sure you've seen this in the news, it's all about all the bad things that immigrants are doing. And I'm like, what is going on? Because there's so much good that we bring. Do want to say to all your listeners that today, October 2nd, till November 5th, the diversity visa lottery is open. So if you are from those countries that qualify you to apply for the diversity visa, please apply. I have a free tutorial that I made that I'm going to send you after the meeting so that you can include it in your notes. So that your listeners can watch the video and apply for the diversity visa on their own for free, rather than paying somebody thousands of dollars for a process that is so based on luck. So yeah, that's the other reminder that I wanted to leave your audience with.
Okay, so to wrap this up, what advice would you give to our listeners or viewers who would like to come live in the US?
Okay, I think number one is really knowing your options before making that move. So, making an informed decision. I think it's not just about let me get to America and then figure it out there, because this isn't the 80s or the 90s where immigration might have been a lot easier back then. There are so many laws being constructed that really make it very difficult for immigrants to now immigrate to the United States. And then there's also a long backlog for certain countries. I know, for example, somebody who's from India who's here, even though they have a green card sponsor, they have to wait at least 13 years to get their green card. And so you have to really think, is that something that I want to live through? Because, like I said, there's a lot of anxiety when it comes to figuring out your status. Is that something that I really want? If the answer is yes, then by all means, figure out what the next steps are. So you have to come in with the right visa. If you want to come in as a student, I think that's a good option because you come in as a student, you get 1 year work authorization. You can then do the work visa lottery and do the same thing I did. I did 2 degrees, so maybe that's why it took me longer. But coming in as a student is a good path. If you're already dating a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, that's also another option to come in through the marriage-based visa or coming in as a fiance visa. And then again, if you are fleeing persecution for whatever reason, speak to an attorney to see if you might qualify, and then pursue that path either through a refugee path or coming to the United States and then seeking asylum here. So there are options, but figure out your options before you make the move. And there are lots of resources out there that you can educate yourself on. I have a blog that I post pretty frequently. If you're on social media, TikTok is a place that a lot of people talk about immigration to the United States. And then, yeah, I think that's what I would say.
So how can people find you if they would like to check your YouTube channel or if they would like your help and contact you?
Yeah, of course. So I offer free first discovery call to everyone that calls in. And so you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook as Daven the Lawyer. So it's DAVEN lawyer. And then on Instagram and YouTube, I am also there as Kaza Law. So KAZALAW. That's the name of my law firm.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to add all this information also in the description for the podcast so that everyone can look it up. Thank you so much, Daven, for all this helpful information and insights. It was very fruitful and I learned a lot as well, thanks to you. So I appreciate the time that you've taken to be here with us today.
Great. Thank you so much, Tatiana. Once again, keep doing the amazing thing that you're doing and keep raising immigrant voices all over the United States.
Thank you so much.